No,
Don't rely on people.
Integrity Committee. And I said, so why would I stay in the room and take a risk when I can leave the room and scot free? She said, you got a duty.
So welcome everyone to the briefing meeting here at the Bundaberg Regional Council supper room. Over to you, Mr. CEO.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Okay, I've got my reserve technology here. My computer's not working. The first item today, Council, is in relation to regulated parking. You may recall that.
So I'm going to
Thank you, Councillor.
declare a conflict of interest next week, so I'm leaving.
So just for clarity, Councillor McPhee was a signatory to the petition that was considered by Council at its last meeting, and she also declared a conflict there. So Council, as a result of the mayoral minute in responding to the COVID situation just prior to the election, one of the changes we made was to have a moratorium on regulated parking in the CBD. So our parking inspectors were redeployed to other areas, and Council hasn't been monitoring or issuing fines for parking for a couple of months now. We've been approached by the Chamber of Commerce and, as I said, by a petition that was tabled at the last council meeting for council to reconsider that, given the fact that some of the restrictions around COVID now are easing, and we're also aware that Brisbane City Council returned to regulated parking as of this week as well. I've spoken to some individual shopkeepers. The responses varied. Some of them are in favour of returning it as soon as possible. I have to say, from my perspective, looking at this end of the CBD, there always does seem to be adequate car parks, but I know some of the shopkeepers feel that regulated parking actually assists their business in terms of getting a turnover, particularly for older residents that are able to get a car park close to their business. So, because it was done by council resolution initially, we need a council resolution, obviously, to reverse that decision. So we're looking for, I guess, a decision next week at the council meeting as to when that would occur, if the will of the council is to reinstate it. Staff are recommending at this stage that if you are of a mind to reinstate it, we'd kick it off from the 1st of June. Questions and comments?
Thank you, CEO. You answered my question at the end there, so that's fine. Timing.
Timing, yeah. And there's been some discussion about making sure there was adequate, if it is to be reinstated, making sure there's adequate notice, obviously in terms of public notification, so people are aware of the change. Councillor Hamilton.
Would there be any moratorium on issue of fines, say, giving a short period of grace, people who haven't heard or know that they have, if they are in fact reinstated, you know, one week is a huge amount of time, so.
That could be built into the council decision next week as to whether you wanted to give a period of grace and waive the fines that were issued for the first week. So that'll be entirely up to the council if that's the way they want to introduce it.
Thank you.
Okay, nothing else on that one? Sorry. Oh, yes, please. So the next report is in relation to a notice of motion that council adopted at its last meeting. And I'll read out the notice of motion was that I give notice that at the next ordinary meeting of council, a report be provided to outline the role of the Planning and Development Committee, including the identity of 3 elected members of council, and that they be appointed at that meeting. So that notice of motion is to be formally looked at the council meeting next week. In my report, I've given a brief history of how planning functions in Queensland and what local government's responsibilities are in relation to planning. I provided a summary of which councils of like size in Queensland have a planning committee and which don't. And then I've talked briefly about the fact that if you are to have a planning committee, the council needs to determine how many councillors be on the committee, bearing in mind what the notice of motion says. But probably more importantly, what delegations the council is prepared to give that planning committee should they wish to have a planning committee. The council, up until 2016, Bundaberg Regional Council had a planning committee which consisted of all the councillors, and they had a level of delegation to determine applications without them having to go to council. But having said that, there was still an overriding opportunity for all councillors to call any application to the full council for determination as currently exists, with council staff having delegation currently. So, happy to take questions and comments. Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, CEO. Councillors, I'll just foreshadow that when this matter comes before the next council meeting, I'll be seeking leave of council to add some clarity and put the word advisory after planning and development. So it would read outline the role of a planning and development advisory committee, and I think that would address some of the issues in relation to delegations.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes.
As opposed to confusing it with the standing committee.
And my report is written on the basis that it would be intended to be a standing committee, so that is an important point of clarity.
Yeah.
And I'll provide additional information to the councillors prior to the council meeting about what the distinction is between the two.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Cooper.
Yes, Mr. CEO, could you just add some more clarification to the numbers relating to the different sections of the state? You've given a chart within that summary in relation to the decided by delegation of authority and decided by council. So in the first instance, SEQ averages, based on all 10 SEQ councils, left decided by individual council at 3.44. If you take it over the broader picture, when you take the overall averages at 7.01% being approved. So we fit into the category of the non-SEQ or the
We're a non-SEQ council,
yes.
but the statistics provided in that chart on SEQ councils. And I think, I'll check with Michael, I think the reason for that might be is I'm not sure if we have the data for any non-SEQ councils, do we?
CEO, that data was sourced from LGAQ and they didn't provide the raw number of applications involved. It's more looking at a trend about the percentage of applications decided to, because obviously some councils decide more applications than others based on their levels of activity.
Right.
So I'm reading into the clarity of that in saying that once adopted and we put that into place, we've actually improved the red tape scenario of the planning area. So we've reduced the time.
Well, that was certainly the intent of the changes the council made 2 years ago as a result of the independent report we had. We adopted those recommendations was to improve assessment and processing and determination times, and we've certainly achieved that under the current regime.
That's
Yeah.
Just another one for clarity. So non-SEQ average, which we're a part of, that's 10.27% of all the development applications that come to council, which are normally done under delegation anyway.
I'll check with Michael, but my understanding of that is it's saying that 1 in 10 applications that are decided comes to the full council.
That's correct.
That's correct.
good. So as I understand.
Councillor Hammond.
Question. Sorry if I should know this or what, but what's the point of difference between Bundaberg and those councils who have standing committees, such as in Toowoomba, Townsville and Rockhampton?
Well, I guess the fact is I wasn't trying to find a point of difference, I was trying to find a point of similarity. And so I was giving you examples of councils that were of a similar size that might have similar issues, similar geographic areas. So obviously no two is the same, but I'm trying to find councils that might give you some comparison, valid comparison.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, so on the basis of what Councillor Barnes says, I'll provide that additional information about advisory committees prior to council considering the item formally next week. Thank you.
That'd be the correct method for me to seek leave of council to change work.
Well, at the moment, the notice of motion has been superseded by this report.
Yep.
Because what your notice of motion effectively said was to give us a report.
Yep.
So from the floor, you can say, you can clarify what your intent was about whether the committee was advisory or standing.
Yeah, it was never to have a standing committee.
Okay, so the next item is the appointment for all council current committees and the council representatives on those committees. So the list is provided at the end of the report along with the proposed council representatives. There are some changes obviously to the makeup of the committees and the representation given the fact we have 4 new councillors. I'll just also clarify that there was a question raised about the Sister City Committee. It's recommended at this stage that the Sister City Committee be put in abeyance and that we come back with a separate report looking at whether we broaden the terms of reference of that Sister City Committee to be a more community-based one, as I understand existed perhaps in Bundaberg 8 or 9 years ago rather than its current makeup. Obviously, with the current COVID-19 situation, there's no necessity to have the Sister City Committee in operation currently. There won't be any trips either way this year. And so we'll come back with a later report, probably in the next 2 to 3 months, and looking at what the options might be and how that committee could be formulated. Happy to take questions, clarification. Councillor Hammond. Oh, sorry, then Councillor.
Do we have clarification yet as to what was happening with that Webrock Sport and Recreation Advisory Committee, whether that is continuing or?
That will depend on Webrock. Webrock hasn't had their first meeting after the election yet, although the Sports and Advisory Committee had a meeting. The first Webrock meeting is scheduled for the first week in June, Mr. Mick.
First week of June.
And that'll determine the chair of Webrock, which committees he wants to have, etc.
So if that Sport and Rec Advisory Committee continues, then a person can be appointed to that at a later meeting?
If necessary, yes. Yep.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, is just whether in the Sport and Rec or what other committees that Webrock so decides, there may be other opportunities from a wider regional level that may come back to council and be decided, as will the Sport and Recreation one.
Thank you.
Councillor Honour.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Question in regards to the Sister City possible arrangements in the future. If we were to develop a community committee, would there be a responsibility to have a councillor on that, or could it simply be a consultation to council committee or a advisory to council committee?
As the Mayor said, that would be, Councillor Honour, that would be part of the deliberations at that time. Whether it would be an advisory committee, whether it would be council representation.
But there wouldn't be any specific requirement for it to be a council membership committee.
No, I think all those options are on the table. Okay, nothing else on committees? Thank you. The next item is fees and charges register 2021. Anthony, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. Okay, the fees and charges for 2020-21 have been provided there under the Local Government Act, sections 97 and 262. Council is able to determine the fees and charges. The fees and charges are split between what we call cost recovery, or referred to as cost recovery, and also commercial fees. So the cost recoveries are the fees that council provides and basically has a monopoly on. and the requirement there is that council does not make a profit on those fees, where the commercial fees, just normal commercial rules apply. All the fees and charges have been reviewed by the relevant managers, and as previously determined under our long-term financial plan, the fees were generally increased by 2.5%, and there's variations for rounding and also in some circumstances where the fee may have moved by another amount. Just with the cost of levy being that we can't make a profit as such, the council does have a calculation model that the managers will go through and identify all the tasks that are involved in a fee and cost that out against the employees' wages, as well as on costs for employment and also across the department. Those on costs are in line with what we do for national competition policy for the water and sewage businesses units as well. So I present the fees and charges there for council to consider and adopt. Any questions?
Questions, comments? Thanks, Anthony. You can stay in the seat and do the hard one.
Okay, the financial summary for as at the 1st of May 2020 is presented there for council. This is required under the Local Government Act that we have to present a summary every month or as close as possible to the end of each month. In the summary there, I suppose most things are COVID-19 related in the queries. The points probably worth noting is that COVID-19 will definitely have an impact on our fees and charges. The fees and charges are tracking slightly below budget and will be impacted by COVID-19. As the same as interest, so interest on rates, and that's part of the council stimulus package that we've reduced or stopped charging the interest on rates, but that have a slight impact. And also the interest rate is below what we would have expected at this time of year when we did the budget. With the grants and subsidies, we're expecting that to basically come in online with, at this stage we're still expecting the advance payment of the fiscal assistance grants to come through, although the state haven't had their budget, that's been deferred. We haven't got any further information on that yet, but there's about $4 million tied up in that we're expecting to come through. So obviously if it doesn't, that's going to have a significant impact on our operating result for the current year. With the recurrent expenditure, employee costs are tracking along budget. The materials and charges, materials and services we expect will be below budget at the 30th of June, and that's mainly due to some of the non-capital projects that will be outstanding. With the capital expenditure, it's running at 58%, including our debt redemption, or about 56%, just on pure capital construction, which is a fair margin behind where we expect to be at this time in the year. However, there's a large program of works that's scheduled to be completed this financial year, so we're expecting to be a lot closer by the 3rd of June, but there probably will be some carryovers in that budget. Some of that will be related to projects where there is not purely related to council, and there's funding and other agencies are involved to defer the projects. From a cash point of view, we have no short-term liquidity issues foreseeable, even with the impact of COVID-19 and the initial impact over probably the next 6 months. We don't see any cash shortcomings where we'd have to look for additional working capital. So at this stage, I think we're fairly comfortable there. With the rates debtors, just a note there that once again we haven't been actively recovering the debts for the last couple of months, and we have seen a drop off in payments on rates coming through there, so we expect that to continue to the 30th of June. And the other debts are also decreasing, and that's probably reflecting that we're not undertaking the parking restrictions at the moment and fines for infringements in that space. Also, we finally received our final payment for the multiplex, although that's not in these figures, but it has come through in May, and there's about $500,000 that's come through in that claim there. So, any questions?
Sorry. The claim, what's that in relation to, I'm sorry?
The multiplex, so the construction of the multiplex, we've got grant funding for that, and the final claim has just been paid, so it's taken
Okay.
a period of time to come through.
Like an insurance claim or something like that.
Yeah, no, sorry, funding claim.
Mr Mayor, let's just make a comment about outstanding rates. I think we will need to consider some communications closer to the end of June when we're starting to charge interest again and starting recovery action. So whilst there's been a moratorium, it may well come as a shock to some people that we're actually going to be starting to charge interest again on outstanding rates and actively pursuing them. So we'll work with the commerce team to put some information out about that.
Yeah, just for clarification for the room through you, Mr Chair, is Anthony, what's the total figure outstanding? As at the end, that was the start of May, we're nearly through May now, you know,
Yeah, no, I don't have the current figure at this stage. So.
up there.
No, that's the figure at the start.
End of May.
Yeah, the start of May, yeah, what do you got?
6.
7.6 up there, yeah.
Harvey, say that again.
7.6.
Yeah, thank you.
So we'll come back with the updated figure for the council meeting next week. No other questions? Thanks, Anthony. Christine, welcome. The council policy review.
Good afternoon, councillors.
Good afternoon.
So, in response to our policy workshop that we worked through recently, council's officers are presenting to councillors for adoption a suite of policies in May. The policies are adopted to ensure compliance with legislation requirements or provide guidelines on matters which may impact the community or support council's strategic objectives or assist in the delegated decision-making of council staff. The policies have been recently reviewed and further reviews will occur annually if required by legislation, biannually or in response to changes in law or best practice. For adoption this month, we have the Acceptable Request Guideline Policy version 5, the Administrative Action Complaints Policy version 2, Advertising Spending Policy version 2, Buy Local Policy version 3, Community Engagement Policy version 2, Complaints about the Chief Executive Officer version 2, Council Vehicle Usage Policy version 3, Councillor Complaints Investigation Policy version 2, Councillor Portfolio Policy version 1, Councillor Use of Confidential Information Policy version 2, Expenses Reimbursement for Councillors Policy version 3, Fraud and Corruption Management Policy version 3, Gifts and Benefits Policy version 2, Hardship Policy version 3, Media Relations Policy version 2, Planning Protocols Policy version 1, Procurement Policy version 2, Public Interest Disclosure Policy version 4, Revenue Policy version 3, and Risk Management Policy version 2. Where there are existing policies in place, those will be rescinded, and then the endorsement of the Employee Code of Conduct Policy version 1. Got any questions?
Councillor Barnes.
Sorry, it's just can I just get back to it? So I'm referring to the Acceptable Request Guideline Policy, paragraph 5, which says customer requests for service should be directed through council CRM system, etc., etc. How does it? Do we need to capture snap, send, solve in there, Steve? Because quite a few councillors do use that.
Yeah, no, the snap send solve then results in the CRM being created.
All right. Okay.
So it's just a way of feeding information into that system.
Yeah, and just to clarify as well, just to assist us about that, so all the 1300 numbers come into that as well.
Yeah.
So the whole complaint process comes into
Thanks, Christine. The next item is in relation to the organisational structure. Under section 196 of the Local Government Act, council must by resolution adopt a structure. The last structure that was adopted by council was 2018. The structure that's been put up today for adoption is actually the same as the structure that was adopted then. There's been no changes in that structure or all the personnel, more pleasingly probably, I should say, for the last 2 years. And we're putting that forward for the new council now to adopt to comply with the requirements of the Local Government Act. Questions or comments? Happy to take. Okay, thank you. Then we move on to the planning matters. Michael? No, Richard, sorry.
Good afternoon, councillors. Councillors, item L1 is a reconfiguration of a lot application over land at 50 CSR Depot Road, Chills. Councillors will notice within the reading of the report that it was originally submitted as 1 into 7 lot subdivision, but through the assessment process was modified a couple of times by the applicant to what's currently being assessed, which is a 1 in 5 lot development proposal. So the land's approximately 5.3 hectares in area, which is just a touch over 12 acres in the old vernacular in the rural zone of the planning scheme. And as I said, the applicant's proposing a 1 to 5 lot subdivision with lots sizes in the range of 3,900 square metres at the smallest and 26,900 square metres at the largest. The land itself is located approximately 3.5 kilometres northwest of Childers and about 1.5 kilometres from Apple Tree Creek. And being in the rural zone, councillors will note that the application has gone through an impact assessment process, an assessment process that included a public notification period. The report itself details the assessment benchmarks. It's the applicable parts of the code that the assessment officers have looked at in the assessment of the application. And some of the key features are detailed there in section 3 of the report. The primary considerations that council officers have looked at is that the land is located in the rural zone, so there's rural planning area codes and rural zone codes that aim to protect and preserve rural land, and the proposal is a proposal which aims to create allotments that are below the 100 hectare minimum allotment size. The applicants put this proposal forward on the basis that the surrounding locality is characterised by a mix of both larger rural parcels but also smaller either rural zoned lots that are used for rural residential purposes or actually rural residential zoned lots which also exist in the locality. So it's a fairly fragmented rural landscape, and the assessment details the officer's views of the proposal against those relevant codes. We also look closely at supporting infrastructure for the development, particularly the road characteristics in that locality. And there's an engineering analysis that looks at the requirements in relation to basic supporting infrastructure for new development on those lots, as well as that road area. As I said, it did go through public notification, and there's a section in the report that details the submissions that council received during the public notification period. We received 5 submissions from members of the public, and the matters that they've raised detailed in the report with a officer response, but could be summarised as concerns about the impact of introducing residential style lots in a rural area and the agricultural interface, or the impacts that might be experienced through reverse amenity between a residential use and an agricultural use. There's a cane railway line that runs at the bottom of the hill, and there was a concern or a focus to ensure that the assessment or approval of an application didn't impact on cane railway infrastructure. Concerns are raised about traffic safety and access on the roadway. Also just about general amenity changes and noises associated with additional residential activities that might occur on any new lot that was created. So there's a commentary within the report about those matters. As a summary point, the officers have balanced those considerations and recommended a proposal for approval, and there's reasons for those decisions there at item 7 of the report, but essentially, or in summary, details that despite the rural land zoning and that the land hasn't been used actively for cropping purposes, it's small in its size, and the surrounding locality is developed for rural residential type purposes. From an engineering perspective, officers believe that these new lots can be serviced adequately with infrastructure and are fairly well positioned near or close to existing townships, making it a suitable area for a rural residential expansion despite the current rural zoning. Just some of the conditions that are suggested to be applied to the development are detailed in the Schedule 1 of the proposal, and conditions of note are that there's some roadworks conditions that are recommended to be imposed. That's a widening of between 700 mil and 1 metre of road widening, which should assist with some of the access issues. There's also a requirement to seal access handles to ensure there's not dust or other impacts from vehicles travelling down access handles that service 2 of the allotments. Stormwater drainage is an item that needs to be considered so that any site works don't create runoff into adjoining properties. Councillors will note that there's 2 suggested conditions relating to the agricultural interface issues. One is condition 23 that identifies the requirement for proposed lots 1 and 5 to have agricultural buffers in place. They are vegetative buffers to remain in place to ensure that any impacts from the adjoining agricultural land don't adversely impact on the residential uses being created nearby. Also a building envelope condition, and that's primarily about getting a building envelope that's a minimum of 140 metres away from the Cane Railway infrastructure, so there's not complaint or concern raised by new residents in terms of the surrounding rural locality. That's alerted to a future owner through property notes, and councillors will note there's a recommendation that there be a commentary about the rural activities that occur around the area, so that all new landowners know that there's rural activities happening in the locality, and that the lots affected by agricultural buffers or building envelopes, that future purchasers know that there's a requirement there as well. So recommended for approval subject to those conditions.
Thanks, Richard. Very comprehensive. Questions, comments?
Just a quick question. The lots that are already developed on the other side of the road, which are lots 49, 53 and 57, what size are they in comparison to the smallest one on these proposed plans?
And through the chair, I think they're
They look quite small.
smaller than the proposed lot. So if we look at proposed lot 2 being just under 4,000 square metres, then I'd suggest that the ones on the opposite side of the road were somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 square metres. Those lots were actually created through, there's an old mill site down the back there, so those lots were created some 100 years ago through an historical subdivision. The more recent rural residential land over here, which creates 5 acre lots, which is a bit more typical of a new rural residential estate, was done in about 1990.
Questions? Thanks, Richard. We'll distribute that as a plan so people can see the exact dimensions of those other lots. The next item is the COVID-19 community sports support program. Councillor Hammond.
Just on this one, I will be declaring a perceived conflict of interest as a life member of Bundaberg Cricket, Brothers Cricket, Figures Football Club and Brothers Sport Club, and also a volunteer you are a correspondent of Bundaberg Rugby League, but I will plan on staying.
Thank you. Gavin, welcome.
Thank you. Afternoon, councillors. Obviously, as the CEO said, item R1, COVID-19 Economic Stimulus Package Community Support Program. So the memorandum of minute that was approved by council on the at the meeting on the 24th of March outlined as one of the stimulus items under that package was support by way of a grants program for local sporting organisations that might have been affected as a result of COVID-19.
Excuse me. Sorry, Mr. CEO, I also have a potential conflict of interest with Carlisle Cyclists.
Oh, okay, thanks,
As a
councillor.
member.
So you'll be declaring perceived conflict and staying as per councillor Hammond?
I think so, because in the report it suggests that the cycling wouldn't really be affected by this.
Okay, thank you.
So councillors, one of the exercises that staff undertook was to do a survey of local sporting organisations to get an idea of what they perceive to be the impacts of COVID-19 on their organisations, and that was done in conjunction with our local advisor for Queensland Government Sport and Rec. The three key things that came out of that was that local clubs are concerned about financial stress, difficulty in maintaining their grounds facilities during this period, and worried about recovery, about whether members and volunteers will actually return after all this is over. So additionally, there was a National Good Sports survey that was undertaken, which we got a copy of, which indicated similar sort of things across Australia. We also assessed what other councils were doing in this space to see what sort of level of support was provided, and the proposed policy that we've got here for approval fits in with what most of the local councils in the area are doing in regards to the quantum of support. One of the things we tried to assess was what's the most appropriate measures by how do you assess who's going to be in need. The general view seemed to be by most councils was about those who are asset owners, so those who either own clubhouses or grounds or were leasing, so had some legal obligation in regards to looking after or maintaining grounds, because they're the clubs and organisations that effectively would have still had to require and spend money when activities weren't occurring. So they still would have had electricity, they still would have had phone bills, still would have had to maintain their grounds, still would have building insurance, no doubt, and other outgoings, as opposed to other clubs that purely simply use facilities and don't own them. So the intention with the policy was to target those specifically, look at hardship with a maximum of up to $5,000 per application they could put in, with a total budget proposed for next financial year of $200,000, so at least 40 groups could be assisted. I think that was the key points. The policy sort of talks about the fact that we want to see financials and some support of those, and I guess we would assess those based on who submits and the sort of impacts that they've had, with the grant being up to $5,000. So wouldn't necessarily be a maximum, wouldn't be $5,000 for everyone, but we determine based on what they submit up to a maximum $5,000. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Questions, comments? Thanks, Gavin. We'll proceed to put that amount into the budget after the council meeting next week. The following 10 items are going to be discussed in confidential, but as we're closing the meeting, and some councillors have indicated they want to flag conflicts or material personal interests, so I might just do that before we close the meeting for transparency purposes.
Oh yes, Mr Mayor, on item T3, open for development, I'll be leaving the meeting room in regard to a possible material interest, in that I have an open for development contract with council that isn't completed yet, and it's unknown what the future of that will be. So the other one is I have a with T8, the solicitor is named there, Marlon Law is my lawyer, and also I have a real conflict in that I have a water allocation with Sunwater, who are involved with the Paradise Dam water. So I'll leave the meeting in that one as well, please.
Thanks, Councillor Ryan. Councillor Trevor.
Mr. CEO, I'll be declaring a perceived conflict of interest in P8 at the meeting. I previously had a lease on a farm which gave me legal and physical access to Sunwater. I previously declared a conflict of interest in that. The lease is now finalised a few months ago, but because of the closeness of the finalisation of the lease and this matter, I'll be declaring a perceived conflict of interest leaving the room so that there's some distance between my holding that to down the track.
Thank you. Any other councillors? Councillor Bartels.
Through you, Mr Chair, I'll be declaring a perceived conflict of interest in item T11 as my wife is an employee of the proposed county.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
I'll be declaring a perceived conflict of interest for item R1 as a member of the Coral Isle Cyclists Centre.
Anything else? No. Okay, so we'll then close the meeting and go into confidential to discuss those 10 items.